Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is August 21st. On this day in 1996, 11-year-old Trudy Appleby vanished from her driveway in Moline, Illinois. Her disappearance became one of the area's most heartbreaking mysteries, haunting her family and community for nearly 3 decades. But in 2025, after years of vigils, rumors, and dogged detective work, there was finally a seismic breakthrough. Today, we're talking about the disappearance of Trudy Appleby and the updates in her case. Let's get started. If you lived in Moline back in the summer of 1996, you likely knew Trudy Appleby. She was small for her age, with long brown hair and a mischievous smile. She loved rollerblading, swimming, and playing with her best friend, Amber. Like most kids her age, she was caught between childhood and adolescence. She was still clinging to play, but she was curious about the bigger world. On the evening of August 20th, Trudy was at Amber's house. They ate hot dogs and mac and cheese and rollerbladed until the sun went down. The next day, Trudy had been invited by a family friend to go swimming, and she wanted to go, but her dad, Dennis, said no. They had a family trip coming up, and she still needed to pack. Trudy promised Amber that she'd call her the next day, and then she headed home. It was an ordinary end to an ordinary summer night. The next morning, Dennis peeked into her room before leaving for work. His little girl was still asleep. He figured he'd see her when he came back for lunch. But sometime between 9:30 and 10:30 a.m., a neighbor saw something unusual. Trudy was climbing into the passenger seat of a gray, boxy four-door sedan, maybe a Chevy Celebrity. The driver was a white male in his 20s with long, curly, dark hair underneath a baseball cap. The neighbor didn't know who the man was, but also didn't think that Trudy was in any danger. She wasn't screaming or resisting. It seemed as though she knew him. But when Dennis came home for lunch that day, Trudy wasn't there. He left her a note and went back to work, assuming she'd just gone to see Amber. But by that evening when he returned, everything in the house was exactly how he had left it. The uneaten food, her things, everything was untouched. When he still didn't hear from her, panic began to surface. Around 7:30 p.m., Dennis called the police. His voice was tight with fear. He said, quote, "We got a problem." At first, the search was frantic. Dennis used his CB radio connections to get the word out about his missing daughter. Volunteers hung flyers and formed search parties. The community rallied, but as weeks turned into months, the case grew colder. Years passed with no sign of Trudy, and then decades. But the investigation didn't stop. In 2017, investigators took a bold step. They named William Ed Smith as a person of interest. Smith matched the description of the driver from that morning. He was known to drive a gray, boxy car. He'd also been close enough to Trudy's family to explain why she might have willingly gotten into his vehicle. But by then, Smith had been dead for 3 years. In 2020, police added 2 more names to the list: Smith's son-in-law, David Whipple, and longtime family friend, Jamison Fisher. Both were suspected of knowing more than they had ever admitted. Whipple died in 2022, but Fisher was still alive, and still a question mark. In 2023, detectives dug at one of Fisher's properties in Kelowna, Illinois. No remains were found, but the act itself sent a message. They were not giving up. And Detective Michael Griffin, who has spent years on this case, spoke directly to anyone who might still be holding secrets, saying, quote, "To those who are involved and remain, know this: we're coming. We're not giving up. This isn't fading away," end quote. But after that, Trudy's case went silent once again. Then came the news that some were beginning to think would never come. On August 13th, 2025, just 1 week shy of the 29th anniversary of Trudy's disappearance, a Henry County grand jury indicted 50-year-old Jamison Fisher on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of concealing a homicidal death. Fisher wasn't a stranger. He'd been part of the Appleby family circle and was trusted as a family friend. Prosecutors now allege that Fisher strangled Trudy to death and hid her body. Her remains have never been recovered, but authorities say that the evidence is strong. At the time of the indictment, Fisher was already in custody in Iowa on unrelated drug charges. His public defender quickly withdrew from that case, citing a conflict of interest. Moline Police Chief Darren Galt didn't mince words. Quote, "This arrest does not erase the pain, but it does bring us one step closer to closure." End quote. For the Appleby family, the news is both devastating and relieving. After nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions, someone had finally been named and finally been charged. Rock Island County State's Attorney Dory Villarreal summed it up. Quote, "This is what 29 years of sweat, tears, and all-consuming dedication looks like." End quote. Even with the indictment, one large question remains. Where is Trudy? Investigators are still searching, still digging, and still following every lead. They believe that somewhere, perhaps hidden in the woods or near the river or buried in a field, are the answers that the Appleby family deserves. The trial ahead will be grueling and the details will be painful. But after nearly 30 years, the case is no longer frozen in time. For the first time, the possibility of justice feels like it's within reach. This year's vigil for Trudy will be held at the Moline Police Department. It will be led, as always, by Pastor Dean Yeager, who recently told reporters, quote, "For me as a pastor, I was reading a verse today over in Numbers 32:23, which simply says, 'Be sure your sins will track you down.' And it seems like that has come to the surface." End quote. We covered Trudy's case on our podcast, and then they were gone. This week, we're going to dig into the charges and who Jamison Fisher is, so keep an eye out for a more in-depth update episode on your podcast feed. That will be dropping in the next couple of days. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Trudy's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!